I cannot project my voice too much. I'm recovering from a cold that I caught last week Sunday, standing outside of the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. That's a federal prison, by the way. And the reason why I was standing out there for almost 12 hours, about 11 hours, is because the men and women who are in MDC Brooklyn have had no electricity and no heat for 8 days as of last week Sunday. And last week Sunday we were out there protesting, galvanizing, and spreading awareness. A lot of elected officials came out until about 9:30 p.m. The lights came on, which is great. However, there's a push now to remove the warden. Why? I'm glad you asked. It's because it was a civil rights violation. 8 days locked in a cell, no electricity, no heat. It was about 10 degrees in New York. And people have been locked in their cells for 4 days without a shower. So I want you to understand and process that. Because MDC Brooklyn is just a snapshot of our criminal justice system around the country. This is not one isolated incident. This is happening around the country. I was in MDC Brooklyn. By the way, I am formerly incarcerated. In case you don't know my name, Roy Waterman, and I'm the Criminal Justice Project Manager, and I was incarcerated in MDC Brooklyn in 2009 for several weeks, and they had no heat then. So I thought I'd just add that in. So here we are, 10 years later, and we have the same problem. So please, if you have seats, there are some seats over here. If you need a seat, Leslie, up here somewhere. There's a seat over here as well, if you want to sit down. There's one over here. It's nice, spacious. It's spacious and off to the side. So thank you, everyone, for coming to this to this breakout group. We appreciate you. I like standing rooms only, so I'm glad to see people continue to file in. I have an incredible panel of leaders. I have incredible panels of leaders from around the country who are doing work in criminal justice reform, and they are all impacted one shape or another. So JCPA's adoption of the Criminal Justice Project started about 2 years ago, and we created, this is in the back of the room, our Criminal Justice Toolkit. And what this is, basically, is the ABCs, 1, 2, 3s of the Jewish community being involved in criminal justice. So there are examples in this booklet that show you how your CRC can be involved or engaged with this issue of criminal justice reform. How do you go about it? How do you build relationships? How do you build community? All those things are boiled into this. The good thing for you, and what makes you, I don't believe in luck, what makes you be honored and blessed right now, is the fact that I'm the living, breathing version of this book. So, you have questions about this book, you see me, you should have questions for me as well. I always say that, and I said it last night at the launch of our conference, at an incredible movie. For those who were there, raise your hands, wave at me. Was it an incredible, powerful movie? Can we get a hand clap for Cindy, who's still here, who's about to leave? Right, Cindy, I'm putting you on the spot, because that's what I do. Put you on the spot. So Cindy is the person who the movie was based off of, who received a 15-year sentence for crimes that were committed years earlier that she was not involved with, and she ended up getting a 15-year sentence, going into the federal system and fighting for clemency, and her brother documented her story over the course of 9 years. So you have homework for everyone that has pen and paper. The homework is, the sentence is the movie, it's on HBO Demand. So you all can watch it. HBO Demand, The Sentence. That's part of your homework. The other part of your homework is a book I want you to read. A good friend of mine wrote it. It's called Incarceration Nations. Boz Dressinger wrote this book. And what she did basically is, she's a professor at John Jay. She runs a program called Prison Reentry Institute. And she helps people who come home from prison get degrees, bachelor's, master's, and higher education. And she's mostly based in Africa, and she comes back and forth. but she did a trip basically around the world to about 7 different countries and had unlimited access into their criminal justice systems. And one of the reasons, and this also story speaks to the power of your privilege and the power of your complexion, because she got unadulterated access into these facilities because she's a white woman, and she even admits it in the book. So I'm not just throwing that out there as a black man. She admits this on her own, that she was able to access certain areas that anyone else probably wouldn't be able to access. But when it was all said and done, one of the worst criminal justice systems was still here. Rikers Island, which exists in New York, my home state, unfortunately. Not one of the things we like claiming and owning up to, because it's costing us about $270,000 a year per person per bed to house a person on Rikers Island. $270, all taxpayers. So we at JCPA engaged with the issue of criminal justice reform back 2 years ago in starting this with the Criminal Justice Toolkit. And then there's some papers before I start the panel. Civil Rights Mission, anyone's coming, hopefully. We're going to Alabama. We're touching a couple different places. We're going to I call it the Lynching Museum. That is not the accurate terminology for it. But it's incredibly powerful by Brian Stevenson. He put it together also in conjunction with Google. I went to the launch event in New York years ago. This is from April 28th to April 30th. So if you're interested, here's the information. Also in your chair, a little bit description and detail about the Criminal Justice Initiative. And then, of course, if you have a couple of dollars, we have a matching grant. So that's there as well. So without further ado, I want to talk about, or introduce, my incredible panel. And I'll start by saying, next to me is Shae Harris, who works for the DC Mayor's Office for Public and Safety and Justice. And she's going to talk. I'm going to give them 2 minutes apiece to introduce themselves and the work they do. In 2 minutes or less, I am a disciplinarian when it comes to moderating. So I'm going to also just pose this to you when it comes to Q&A. Please ask a question. If you have a comment, please keep it under 20 seconds. So please be direct. And the last thing I'll say to that as far as Q&A is, remember there's no such thing as a stupid question. The stupidest question you can ever ask is the one you never ask. Don't forget that, okay? So next to Shae is Bridget Simpson, who's from BRIJECTS, and she's doing incredible work in Atlanta. And then next to her is LaTonya Tate, who's also doing some incredible work with the Alabama Justice Initiative, and she's doing some incredible work. And she's not just a reentry program. She left me a note, not Fresh Start reentry program, okay? But I want to introduce you to my panel and let them talk about themselves a little bit in about 168 seconds or less.
No pressure. Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'll try to stay at this level. Again, my name is Shae Harris. I feel very blessed and fortunate to join you all today. As Roy mentioned, my official title is a policy advisor in the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety and Justice here in DC. That's quite a mouthful. What does that actually mean? Well, let me first give the disclaimer because I see the camera. So these views are my own. I'm not speaking on behalf of the government in any official capacity. So I had to get that out the way. Jokingly, but not jokingly. And so I come to this work, I was just sharing with my co-panelists, I'm a black woman, as you can see. And so this work is very personal to me. I know people in my family that have been affected. I know people in my community that have been affected. And overwhelmingly, we know disproportionately African Americans are affected by our current justice system. And so for the very early part of my career, really until the last 5 years, was in the nonprofit sector. I like to think of myself as an activist, and so people often are like, well, how do you go from activism to working for government? And so I did direct service in a lot of different nonprofits here in the District of Columbia, and decided along that path that while I'll always do direct service, because that's part of my mission and passion, I want to dismantle our criminal justice system, and I felt like I needed to do that by being within government and working on policy decisions and helping to try to drive policy, to correct policy that we already have that may or may not be working. And so I'm going to wrap up because I know I'm probably getting close to that time. I look forward to talking to you all. And again, I'm happy to be here. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bridget Simpson. I am from Atlanta, Georgia. That is where I do the body of work that I am passionate about. I'm especially passionate about it because I myself am a victim of the criminal justice system. I served 10 years, and of March 30th, 2018, I was released after doing day for day of my sentence. And since I've been home, it's actually just been my life's passion to help to correct some of the things that are going on in the criminal justice. We call it criminal no justice system. That's what we make reference to it. I just see so many things behind bars and outside of bars where we just can tell that the system, even though it was created to work the way that it did, it does, because people say that the system is broken, but actually it's correct. It is created to oppress and suppress those people who are not that don't fit into a certain mold. So my objectives and my goal is I work with a nonprofit organization. We do direct services as well as we do work with legislation, because we know we have to attack the beast and starve it from many different avenues. So that is what I do on a day-to-day basis. I'm not sure on my time check, but I'm gonna add in there.
Hello, I'm grateful to be here today. My name is LaTonya Tate. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, and I am the founder and the executive director of Alabama Justice Initiative. And what drives me to this work, because it's personal for me. My son went to prison when he was 19 years old, and he was sentenced to a 20-year prison sentence in the state of Alabama for first-degree robbery, and robbery one carries 20 years to life in prison. And it was during that time where I was working for the government, but in the health industry, and I went back to school, got my degree in criminal justice, ended up with a master's in criminal justice, and ended up working for the state of Florida as a PO for nearly 10 years, probation and parole officer. So what drives me to this work, when I retired, my son was sent back to prison twice on technical violations, no new crime, and now we having an issue with probation and parole, with 4.5 million people being on probation and parole than there are in prison. So I'm embedded in this work, and as my panelist said, people say, how do you go from working, from being an activist to working for the government? So it's a reversal for me, coming from the government and being an activist. So my work is policy driven, because we're working on probation and parole reform, and that's what I'm driving. Less is more. So we need to do, less is more, and keep people out of prison, and stop sending people to prison for, technical violations. So that's what drives me to this work, because of the things that happened to my son and the impact that it had on my family.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, the reason why, I selected these three powerful women and based off of the work they're doing is because I believe personally that storytelling has an uncanny ability of dictating a narrative, right? And I believe that we set narratives based off of, sometimes we set narratives based off of a news cycle, sometimes we base a narrative off of what we see every day or what we experience. And I believe we're living in a time right now that's a polarizing time, but I believe more importantly than anything else that we don't fight against people, we fight against systems, right? And a lot of people like to put a lot of stock or weight into the person that's occupying the White House right now, but I really want you to focus on people are a symptom of a bigger problem. So when you're thinking about whatever your thoughts and feelings are right now on the administration in Capitol Hill, you should be thinking about this is a systemic issue that's going on right now, and we're talking about this issue and what it looks like, and it's based off of institutional racism, right? And understanding that and not being afraid to call out the R word. The R word is racism, right? And we need, as I always say, we need people who don't look like us to advocate for us, if not harder for us, in order for us to be in a place where we are treated with dignity, respect, and compassion, right? So my first question to you, Shae, is, you work here in DC for the mayor's office, and as you mentioned, I know you do work around going into prisons So can you please just tell us a little bit about like why you go into prisons?
Yeah.
Like why is it important for people, like not just yourself, but why would it be important for people in this audience at least one time to visit a prison or jail?
Yeah, great question. Because it's not something that you can read about and understand. And I've never been incarcerated, if only because of the grace, right? Because I overheard a dialogue happening prior to the panel starting, and someone was sharing, everyone has done something that could have led them and things could have gone a different way, right? And so I'm very clear on that, and I'm honest about that. And so part of the work that I do is trying to change people's hearts and minds. It's not just about policy, but how do we have love in our policy? And part of that is being able to go into institutions and understand not only the conditions that people are enduring, but there is brilliance that is locked behind our walls. And it is not only my mission, but because of my privilege, I'm obligated to go behind those walls because they have to see me. They have to see people like Roy that have successfully transitioned. And so that's why I do the work, and that's why I take others with me. It's critically important. Every time I go there, while it sounds really crazy, like if I'm feeling down, I make a trip to DC jail. And that sounds really crazy, right? But it helps fuel and keeps me going because I understand why I can't stop in this work. And so that's why, I hope that answered your question,
No,
but that's why I do it.
That's a very powerful point. You know, that's a very powerful point, and the reason why, as I like to tell people, and I said this yesterday, I think, to someone at dinner or something, I said, no matter how bad things might seem out here, they can always be 10 times worse, one. And two, as a formerly incarcerated man, I tell people, because they ask me, like, how did you get involved in this organization? You're black, you're not Jewish, you're formerly incarcerated. And I say to people, at the end of the day, you know, when you're engaging in this topic, you know, you have to think about the investment of human capital, and also, more importantly, that my best day out here, or my worst day out here, is far better than my best day in prison. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't always get that, right? Because we complain, we live our lives, we go about our business, we can like yell, scream at our children, yell, scream at our spouses, or we hate work. But at the end of the day, when you put things in perspective, you realize that we all have privilege in this room. And we don't always identify and acknowledge our privilege. So the question is, how do we use our privilege that we have to make this world a better place and pay attention to the things that are important? So, Bridget, my question to you is this. You're in Atlanta and you're working like on the ground and around like closing jails and ending cash bail in Atlanta. So can you please tell us as a community, like what does that look like as far as community engagement? How do like a regular citizen like be engaged in this work from the outside looking in? If they're like interested and say like, I want to support what you're doing, I just don't know how. How can somebody be engaged in that work?
So the first thing, people aren't engaged because they don't know. It's all about rewriting the narrative of what people view people who were formerly incarcerated, people who are incarcerated look like. So that means that we have to educate them. So that's the primary thing. You have to educate people. Because people look at the criminal justice system as good and bad. Like they look at some crimes that are kind of forgivable, some that are unforgivable. So what it is a matter of education. You have to teach people so they can understand it. So that's the primary thing that we do. When we gather people, when I get people, I'm an organizer. So when I organize people, that's the first thing. Like you have to find people who are fed up because everybody. Sometimes we get comfortable within our privilege. I'll just piggyback. Like if you're, comfortably middle class, some things aren't your problem. Just because you're not homeless does not mean that it's not your problem because you're one paycheck, sometimes two, if you're fortunate, maybe 3 or 4. However, you still are on the same track that they probably were on, right? So that's the first thing is that I humanize what it is that we're going through, what people who are formerly incarcerated, people who are just people. I remind them that I graduated top of my class from Rikers University. So I was in the financial services field. So naturally, prison wasn't anywhere in my foreseeable future. So that's the first thing that we do. We humanize it, and we let them know that people, just like their people, you know, go through these things. So what can we do? Because at the end of the day, these are violations of basic civil rights. They're people that are being arrested, or it's basically they're criminalizing being homeless. Poverty, that's the biggest thing right now in Atlanta. They're getting arrested and being put into city jails because they're poor. And then because they can't afford their bails, they stay in jail. So it's just a system that's designed for it to not work. So what we do is we get into front of spaces and people who have no idea, and we educate them. That's the first thing in organizing. You have to meet the people where they are and show them what the problem is. So the problem is with Atlanta is that our laws are restricted, they're oppressive, they only work for a certain group of people until you get into you get a DUI, and then you get on the other side. So like, we point that out. That's the first thing in what I do. I show the humanity in it. I show the humanity, then I go and I share my story, which is very difficult for me. To sit in front of a group of people that I have no clue who you are, it's very difficult for me to stand up in front of you and say, hey, I've fallen from grace. You know, I served a 10-year sentence day for day, and this is me. So this is what it is. But transparency is another thing that's needed when you're doing any type of campaigning, transformative campaigning. You have to be transparent. Most people hide things, and that's what pretty much ails a lot of the organizing that we have, because people try to paint pictures, and it's nothing that's perfect. But what I let them know is that this will it needs to be repaired in a way that's going to be fair and equitable for everyone. So we need to do this together. What does that look like? So that's engaging a community. You're transparent. You let them know that we're building this thing out together, and how can we get it done. And we engage them because we ask for their ideas, their thoughts, their views, you know, and then we just go and kick down sessions. We go to city council meetings. We stay there for hours, sometimes 7 hours. We testify. We tell about the things that are going on in the community. For the people that are still in jail, I speak for them. I get their testimonies. I write them down. I take surveys. Like sometimes I work from 8 in the morning to 9 at night, because this is the type of work that's most passionate, and you have to show people all different sides of the system.
Thank you. Thank you. LaTonya, I'm going to ask you a question, but it's going to be from the opposite end. So for the people, maybe it's none of these wonderful people in this room, we know that. But for those in society who look at things from a law and order perspective, and you being a probation officer, what is your take on the criminal justice system?
My take on the criminal justice system, being a probation and parole officer for nearly 10 years, and being the only African-American female that worked in my office in a rural white town in Florida called Defuniak Springs, Florida. And most people, if you live in the north, you travel to Florida because you love the sun. So that county is called Walton County, where Destin, Florida is located. I'd shift the culture in my office. My colleagues were used to locking people up in jail if they tested positive for drugs. My county was a meth county. People were on drugs, people were on heroin. So during that time frame, my son was out of prison. Nobody knew that. But nobody could identify why this African-American woman was pouring all her time into wanting to help people that were struggling with drug addiction, mental illness. So you don't get an officer like me every day that sits in an office that wants to give people a chance. What can we do besides locking a person up in jail? It tells me if you're coming into my office and I'm supervising you and you're testing positive for drugs, and I look at your PSI or your history and see that all of your crimes or things that you have done in your past, you got some drug addiction going on. So what I did was I just eradicated that behavior and say, what do we have in place? You know, I really bucked the system, in other words. What do we have in place besides locking somebody up? This person needs treatment. This person has a history of some type of violence. I always try to investigate. And one thing that I did do when I supervised, you know, the people that I supervised in the community, I always treated them like they were somebody. And I told them, if you knew my story, you know, at that time, as I said, I was a mother of a formerly incarcerated, you know, young man who went back to prison twice on technical violation. Nobody knew why I felt the way I did. So that thing, you know, being there, you know, doing the job that way led me into going into the very jail where we were locking people up, start teaching GED classes. I got hired with the local college there, Northwest Florida State College, became an adult education teacher. Then I became the prison liaison, where I would go to the prison, like Shae said, and spend time there. That meant something to me because these are human beings. So I would say to anybody in the community, we got to get engaged. This is an epidemic. It's a problem. It's all of our problem. You know, at one point in my life, when a person went to jail or prison, I'd be like, okay, they going to jail or prison. But when it hit my door, my mindset changed. My mind changed totally because I'm from a middle class family. Mother's a postal worker. I had a government job. I had 3 brothers. We all had good jobs. My son was basically born with a silver spoon in his mouth. So he made a mistake. And when it hit me, I had to change my mindset. I had to change the narrative. I had to start looking at people from a different lens. So now I'm out advocating, you know, with probation and parole departments, because it doesn't only help. We have overworked probation and parole officers. And the first thing that when you give somebody a gun and a badge, we become empowered. So when you have a person that's not following the conditions of their supervision, because what I tell people is when you come out of the jails or you come out of the courts and be put on supervision, you have entered into a legal agreement saying that you're going to follow these rules. And what most people don't realize is these very people that we're supervising have literacy problems. So if you have somebody reading, you can't be gone, you must be in the house by 10 o'clock. Please don't leave the state without permission. Please don't test positive for drugs. Please don't communicate or associate with anybody that has a criminal history. That's impossible. You got all these barriers that you're expecting this individual to do. And God forbid when they're released, you know, out of the atrocious conditions that they're coming out of prisons, then you got to pay $40 supervision fees. You got to pay drug testing fees. How are they going to do that? Impossible. So you got all of these barriers that are weighing in on your shoulder. So I would say to, you know, people that are in law enforcement is the easiest thing for a probation and parole officer to do when somebody is not following the rules, they're going to lock that person up in jail. So now we have to shift that narrative, as my panelists say, that we got to educate. We got to educate not only the people that are doing this job, we got to educate the community to rally around policy and for change to happen. Because we can't keep doing business this way. It's no way.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, speaking to that point, you know, so I'm a firm believer that you can't gauge your impact on this earth while you're here by the amount of zeros you have in your bank account. I gauge my purpose and my reason why I'm here by the amount of people I impact. And investing in human capital and touching someone's heart or speaking life of affirmation or life or words that breathe life into a person doesn't cost you anything as a person, right? No one in this room is sitting where they're sitting at without having a community that was investing in their success, a community that said, I love you, I care about you, I got your back. And also, as well as like resources and opportunity that allow you to flourish, allow you to find your own way. And what we're saying up here collectively is this. We know we live in a system, or we live in a society where it's like focused on crime and punishment. We want healing, restoration, and accountability, though, right? And we have to know that almost 97% of the people who are of the 2.3 million people incarcerated are gonna come home again. So now knowing that, you want the resources poured into individuals to help them transition back into society. You can't just think you're locking people up and throwing away the key. That's only 2% of the population that happens to, who are in prison. So my next question before I open up a Q&A, because I want to leave the audience a lot of Q&A. The first question to you, Shae, which is around, you're going into the DC jails. Talk to me about juveniles and like the juvenile justice aspect of going in and out of jails and the young baby faces, like when I go to Rikers and I see them, who don't have any hair on their face, 15, 16 years old, and don't have a clue a lot of times what they're in right now?
So I'll start with the positive. So DC, as of 2018 actually, so Title 16 youth are youth that are tried as adults in DC. And so those youth are no longer housed at DC jail. They are now part of the Department of Youth and Rehabilitative Services, which is where they should be. That being said, DC has a unique criminal justice system in that we don't own our system. DC almost went bankrupt, and part of the deal in that was essentially to outsource our criminal justice system to the federal government. And so if you are serving over a year, if you're incarcerated, going to serve an incarceration term of over a year, you are sent all across the country to the Federal Bureau of Prisons. So as you can imagine, again, now we've made a great step in the sense that we in the juvenile justice side in DC has done amazing work. And so this is not at all to take away from that because quite frankly, and this is like a humble brag, I think that our advocates here have been able to really be trailblazers, in that space. That being said, we've now created a situation where we have 16 and 17-year-olds that are being tried as adults in this super rehabilitative, transformative environment that is loving on them, that is doing everything that we should be doing. And then when they turn 18, we're sending them off to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, whereas Roy already alluded to with in DC, that was like a case study for the world to see, if you will, of how DC operates in terms of our criminal justice system, meaning that while it's there locally in Brooklyn, they had absolutely no control over what was happening inside of that institution. That's what DC endures every day because we do not control our criminal justice system. And so we often talk about statehood, and that's a whole nother panel, right? But part of the work that we have to do, especially because we have now these young people that, again, are getting what they need in terms of being in an amazing environment and then being sent off to Federal Bureau of Prisons. So we've done some great things. We had the YRA, which is the Youth Rehabilitative Act, which has expanded. And so essentially up into the age of 25, people are able to come back after they've done whatever their terms of confinement or conditions are to see that same judge. And if they've completed successfully, that charge is then put aside. So essentially it's almost like record sealing for people that are up to age 25. We know the brain activity of a young person you're not fully mature. In some cases, we can argue that it's even after 25, but we can at least say with science today that we pretty much agree that it's the age of 25, right? And so we've done a lot of great work on the juvenile justice side, but we have a long way to go in terms of how we're treating young adults. And so I'll land on this point here. The DC jail, which I'm extremely proud of, our director, Quincy Booth, has set up a young men emerging unit, which is specifically for young adults 18 to 25. And it's a peer-to-peer mentoring model, if you will, where mentors, oftentimes older gentlemen that have been locked up for 20, 30, 40 years and that are coming home now for their cases to be retried under the IRAA. And I know I'm throwing out acronyms, it's a DC thing, so I apologize in advance for that. But essentially that piece of legislation mandated that juveniles that receive life sentences, if they've served at least 20 years at this point, are now able to come and have their sentences reheard with the hope that we can start letting some people come home. Because again, we know that far too often people are locked up for way too long. And they're no longer a public safety threat, use that in air quotes, but that being said, then they really should not still be incarcerated. And so that unit, again, takes those mentors, again, with the mentees, which are 18 to 25. It's been around for a little under a year, but we've seen transformative things, and we're super excited about that work. But again, I'll land on the fact that we still have a very long way to go.
Absolutely. Bridget, I'm going to ask you a direct question when it comes to why should any one of these 40, 50 people in this room care? Why should they care about criminal justice?
Why?
Why? condensed version.
Condensed version. Okay, condensed version. Why should you care? Because it might not be you today, but it may be your child. It may be your uncle. Everybody is 6 degrees of separation from being incarcerated. And because this is a problem that only now we're beginning to have a real conversation about, because when the shoe doesn't fit, we don't wear it and we don't care about it. But these days, the shoes are fitting, and the way and the look of the shoes are way different now. So anybody is liable to be incarcerated, including your grandchild, including your daughter's sister's mom. So it can easily be you. So I just encourage you to pay attention to it before it's too late and before the systems of oppression just completely oppress us.
Thank you. LaTonya, last question before we go to Q&A from our audience. You know, you mentioned earlier about like why you got involved with this work and like how, like the transition, right? Mm-hmm. Can you please explain to these great folks in this room how easy it is to be involved with this work?
Well, it's very easy, you know, to get involved. Once it landed in my door, it was just like a no-brainer for me at this point. And, you know, as I stated, as my panelist said, the shoe didn't fit, I wasn't wearing it. So now the shoe fits, and I'm wearing it. So what I'm pushing in my community and back home, since I've returned back to Birmingham, because I left Birmingham almost a decade to take the job to go work for the state of Florida. But what I'm doing now is just old grassroots style organizing. Is getting, as you know, the panelist said, people don't know. So every chance I get, I'm engaging, you know, communities or organizations that I'm partnering with. I'm actually partnered with an organization called Faith in Action, and the guy is, you know, is a Jewish guy. So every chance I get to go to his substation, I'm always telling that community, you know, what's going on. So I launched a campaign around probation and parole. It's called Still Bound, STILLBOUND, Bound Probation and Parole Project. And what that looks like is organizing people that's directly impacted, those that are on supervision, to get involved so we can shift and change some probation and parole policies in the state of Alabama, because it's either two ways out of prison in Alabama. Either you're going to take your time to the door, as my panelist said, or you're going to parole out. So I've started advocating and just doing old grassroots style, just any communities. It's everybody's problem. It's not a black problem, it's not a white problem. I look at it as being everybody's problem. So I just challenge everybody to get in from the ground floor, dig deep, to try to find out what it is that's going on, and whatever fits you, whatever, you know, that you see that's transpiring, that you want to see change, get involved. So we're grassroots styling, you know, around probation and parole practice. And I'm actually going in, I'm going and I'm doing parole hearings. So I am representing people in parole. I just won a parole hearing for a family that person been incarcerated 19 years. He was in for a murder. Of course, the DA was there, the Attorney General protesting the parole, but it didn't work that day, so parole was granted. So I represented someone back in December, and it was a friend of mine, her son, 21, got sentenced to prison on a robbery, and these are violent crimes. And it's real hard to move in Alabama on a violent crime, because as the panelist said, people are unforgiving. So we got to move from that unforgiving stage. And you know, I tell people all the time, you know, people are flowing in and out of their church services every day, going about their daily business and saying we love the Lord, but we're not willing to forgive. So how can we walk this road when we're not willing to forgive our brothers and sisters, people that are suffering? So I question it, and I challenge that. We got to change our heart. We got to change our minds, and we got to get involved. Because again, this is just not, you know, we know that the disparities are there for the African American community, but you all can play a major part. You know, and that's what I'm driving. You know, I got to drive faces with my campaign. Can't only be the face of me. It has to be the face of everybody. This is affected. It's public. We say in public safety, but keeping people bound in cages is not a public. These people can be your neighbor one day. So I just challenge people to please get involved. Get involved. Learn what you can do to get involved. even if it's not happening to you, come in, dive deep in with an organization and say, I want to help.
Thank you. So before I open up for Q&A, I'll say this. First of all, thank you all to my panelists. I want to, really quickly, first I want to talk to, really quickly before I open up for Q&A, and that is, a couple of numbers you need to know. Just general numbers, right? There are roughly about between 2.2 and 2.3 million people who are incarcerated in this country. Roughly about 181,000 of them are in the federal institution and system. The growth of women incarceration has grown over 700% over the last 30 years. The most incarcerated state in this country now, which just recently, about 4 months ago, surpassed Louisiana, is now Oklahoma. As well as, if we live in under the context of letting people go who commit only drug crimes, right? So I want to stay in that place because we like separating crimes, and I don't believe in that. If we let everyone who committed crimes that we deem to be nonviolent, we still have a 60% of the people who are incarcerated are there for violence. So that means that if we have 2.3 and we have 60% left over 2.3, that's about 1 point something million people still incarcerated. 1.4, 1.5 million people still incarcerated. 1 out of every 3 black men are impacted by the criminal justice system. 1 out of every 6 Latinos. 1 out of every 17 white men are impacted by the system. The majority of people who are incarcerated of the 2.3 million are whites. So first, let me put that out there. Poor whites, mainly. It's just that it disproportionately impacts communities of color based off of population size, so you know. People of color make up over 40% of the criminal justice system, and what makes that not an accurate number is because there are only 25 states that actually collect information to determine if a person's Latino or not. So that means there are a lot of Latinos who are posing as white as well, so we really can't get how accurate those numbers are. So Q&A, raise your hand. You have 45 seconds to ask a question. Please ask a question. If you have a comment statement, make that quickly, but please, I want to get as many people as humanly possible. Yes. And please announce your name.
Ron Letterman from Akron.
Thank you.
LaTonya. When you went into becoming a PO and you went into this office to make changes, how much and was there a lot of pushback?
It was.
And how long did it take you to make those changes come about?
It was, I got the side eye because my colleagues was looking at me like, what are you doing? But I stood firm because who I was and what I believed in. And I just challenged, my supervisor. I was like, you can't tell me it's nothing that we can't do. But what I did find out in doing the challenge, what they didn't tell me is, Florida has a preference list. We have 67 counties in Florida. And on that preference list, every county is broken down by circuits. My county was Circuit 1, which covered Pensacola, Shalimar, Florida, Okaloosa County, Bonifay, Florida, the Funiac Springs, Panama City was all in this circuit. Right. And it told you all of the judges that were in these circuits. I was Circuit 1, so we had one judge was our criminal judge, which was Judge Kevin Wells. And you could look on this preference list to see what was their preference when someone tested positive for drugs. And when someone tested positive for drugs in our office, technical letter, which means you can send a letter to the judge to alert the courts that this person is having issues but no warrant. So they get to stay in the community. So they didn't tell me that. And I had one of my colleagues call me. It's like, it's a preference list. And I was like, oh, really? So I went to my supervisor. I was like, all this time we locking people up in jail. You got this preference list and you guys didn't tell me. So that shift the narrative there. So I had my colleagues looking at me real like side eye. Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
Deborah Goldman from Buffalo, New York. And this may be beyond the scope, but have you been successful doing any interventions on the school-to-prison pipeline?
Anyone wants to answer that? I can give my 2 cents on that. I would like to answer that.
It's okay.
If you haven't dealt with the school to prison pipeline, yes or no? Okay, so I'll quickly make a comment. I know people who are working on school to prison pipeline. Brief personal story about myself. I got left back in the first grade at 6 years old, right? The school to prison pipeline is gauged around like policing in schools and making them more like prisons, right? Which ultimately leads to third graders' scores in their tests are determining whether we're building prison cells or not. And that's a problem as a society because we're saying that in 15 years or 12 years, you will end up in the cell based off of your test score. That's a problem, right? Also, which I found out recently, is that there are more law enforcement officers than guidance counselors in our education department across the country. And when I heard that, I had to think about that, and I said, wow, you know what, you're right, because there are roughly about 1 or 2 guidance counselors in every school, but there are about 10 officers. So those are a couple of things, as well as understanding that the foster care system and like how that feeds the school to prison pipeline as well, by quickly either misdiagnosing people. We live in a society where we have to understand that the largest mental health provider is the prison industrial complex. So first understand that part. People who have mental illness are not going to mental institutions, they're going to prison. People who have substance abuse problems are not going to substance treatment abuse centers, they're going to prison. We have, as a society, have gotten to the place where we look at prison as the one-size-fits-all. And that is completely unacceptable, especially as people, especially to the community and constituent I serve, which is the Jewish community, just based off of history, historical context, and knowing the big, like how hard it is to fight against hate, how hard it is to fight against like being objectified and dehumanized, and to use like not just separate restrooms and bathrooms, but also separate golf courses and separate everything. The Jewish community, and this is one of the reasons why I came into this organization, I felt like the Jewish community can identify with communities of color more than any other community. So the question is, why are we not working together? And and the other thing to that question is, this is not 1962, 63. We cannot continue to live off what happened 50 years ago. We know it happened, we acknowledge that it happened. The question is, what are we doing today? So that's my little spill on that. Yes.
So we have I'm Deborah Olashansky, Nashville, Tennessee, and we have a current case that just happened that I will be probably hoping to hit the ground running on when I get back. So this is a case in which 5 children between the ages of 12 and 16 have been accused of shooting a musician. You've probably already. So I know I've got committee members that are going to want us to, because we've been very engaged in the school to prison pipeline situation, and so this is kind of a weird variation on that. They're wanting to charge them all as adults. So my question is, what are the first 3 things I should do when I get home? I mean, I'm obviously not specific.
Number 1 is pray.
I'm not specifically responsible, but our committee is going to want to be engaged. So as a Jewish Community Relations Committee in Nashville, what should we do first?
Let me say something really quickly. First, get all the details of the case before you do anything.
Yes.
Do not rush in defense or rush to like tear down someone. Find out as much details as humanly possible before you make an assessment on what the next step is going to be.
Right, we've got people working on
So
that.
then the next step, in my opinion, is if the case turns out in the way, like you explained it, where you feel like these are children and we need to find a way that's humanizing to treat these children, I think that another conversation would be, okay, let's we had a conversation amongst ourselves. Let's start talking to communities that are directly impacted or grassroots organizations that like are thinking along the same lines. Everything in not just this work, but everything in the society, especially in the business world, circulates around relationships. Everything. So relationship building is key and it's important. So like open that conversation up to now a coalition of people. And you're much stronger to release a statement or protest or act when you have a group of people versus when it's just 1 or 2 people. So that's my little 2 cents.
I would definitely piggyback off of what Roy said, because as the world all witnessed what happened with Centoya Brown. So we definitely don't want to see this happen with these young people.
Who's LaTonya Brown? Because people don't know.
Centoya Brown is the young lady that committed a crime in Tennessee with a prominent real estate guy. And she went to prison when she was 16 years old. And the governor just granted her clemency.
The past governor,
But-
unfortunately, we have a new governor.
The new,
Yeah, and also add into that story that the person she killed was the person that was molesting her,
right.
raping her. So add that misnomer in, by the way. So continue.
We definitely don't want to see, you know, that happen. As Roy said, get all the factual basis, you know, everything you need to start rallying the communities around, you know, these young people. Because I literally just read that story last night, and I was like, oh my God, Tennessee. So we don't want to see them get
And we
thirsty.
have a new governor who's really got us all very concerned.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely gather the, you know, all the factual basis, and gather up people, start doing your own participatory defense work when it comes to what's transpiring. I would definitely get the community engaged, get the families of these kids, get them engaged in this situation as much as possible, because now the situation is on them, so we gotta, you know, get as many people activated as possible.
And then I would agree also with, to piggyback off of Roy, to get other organizations, because in organizing, it's good when you already have bodies of people that are going to make you stronger, because the people power is what's going to make a difference once you're fully informed, like everybody else said. And especially Tennessee is like right next door to Atlanta. So like if there's any questions, you could take my card as far as the organizing piece that I can help you with.
If I can just ask a follow-up question on that. So we're part of NOAA, which is the Nashville Organized for Action and Hope, which criminal justice has been a piece of their work, and so we've been partnering with them on that already. So then my follow-up question would be, can we just be supportive to that? We don't have to take, I mean, I'm feeling like it's not our lead to take, it's more ours to support what these groups that we've already been working with are doing.
That is a good point. That's a good point. So first, let me clarify that. So yes and no. And the yes and no is, yes, you should lead, but you should lead your community. You shouldn't lead the conversation. There's a difference. Yes, when it comes to the community, like, listen, we need to do something as a community, as a conglomerate. How do we come together and like express our displeasure, our disgust as a Jewish community here in Tennessee of what's happening? So you need to be on that page. And then the other part would be like, you know, centered around not just like how do we do this, but also like community building and engagement and such things that are like very controversial are very difficult for any community. Partnership is key to everything. You cannot think you're going to start something and then it's supposed to impact a group of people and you say, here, take this, you need this. That's not how it works. You partner, you have conversations with those who are directly impacted by the issue. The family, as was mentioned, is one. Community organizers and grassroots organizations that are like who are already buzzing around this and already like trying to find ways. It's about partnership and development, but yes, leading is from the community, meaning the Jewish community perspective. And yes.
Andy, hi, from New York. So Roy, in the beginning, you made a really helpful distinction between symptoms and like the structure that's leading to the symptoms. So within the criminal justice reform conversation, can you help me understand, like, what are the fundamental or faulty assumptions that the system is built upon that leads to the symptoms, and can you help like lift up what are those fundamental, all of you, you know, whatever you want to speak about, fundamental assumptions that you think are faulty that are leading to the symptoms? And related to that, the bipartisan criminal justice reform legislation that people are excited about in DC, what does that get at any of this?
No.
So help us understand that.
2 days in a row. Go ahead, please answer.
Okay, well, I would say the system is not, it isn't broken, right? It's created just the way it's supposed to be created. And I would say that the portions of it that aren't working is everything, because it's implying when it says liberty and justice for all, it's not taking into account the fact that there's so many different everybody isn't created equal. Just being transparent, like, depending on your race, your economic disparities, just everything. There's so many subsets within subsets that the law does not work for everybody. So overall, the liberty and justice for all, the beginning of it, even the Emancipation Proclamation, like all of it. So where are the symptoms? The symptoms is with legislation, because the legislation doesn't take into account that these, for example, these minority areas, they are committing crimes because they don't have any money. They don't have any money because, you know, they don't even have books. I remember going to high school with a hole in the ceiling. Yeah, I remember walking, it was winter and it was cold. We had to have 2-3 jackets because they didn't give us updated books in our urbanized areas. We just never got a fighting chance. So with that said, like the whole, I would say, foundation that the law was built on, it was built for not people of minorities. Let's just be clear. It wasn't built for people. It was only built for a certain set of people. So in doing that, we would have to revamp the laws, period, right? So we would have to make them just for all. So certain laws that are like, for example, like say the First Step Act that you were saying, it does not affect everybody, right? Because it's the stats, it's 2.3 million people in prison, right? So only a small percentage of that is going to be impacted because it's only the people for the federal system. So what about the state folks? Yeah. I did 10 years state time. I would have loved for that to work for me, right? Something like that to work for the people that I left behind. But it doesn't. It only speaks to a certain set. So every law that they come up with only tackles certain things. So what we need to do is we need to be more inclusive of everybody in everybody's situation. Why could not that law be for everybody? Why did it specifically only have to be for federal prisoners? Because everybody's not ready to deal with the bigger issues. So first we need to be transparent that the laws aren't really laws.
Federal people in prison.
Yes.
People in prison.
People.
Use prisoner. But it's okay.
Okay, sorry. Prison. People.
Yes,
I'll try to be brief. So, faulty assumptions, so many. That our system is just and that we're actually trying to rehabilitate people is a faulty assumption, because that's not what our criminal justice is designed to do. That locking people up actually makes us safer when all data shows that that is in fact not true. And so we really have to grapple in this country with, then if we know if we lock someone up, and especially for the amount of time that we're historically locking people up for, is not making our community safer, then what are we actually trying to accomplish? So that's like a real conversation. I would just add again that like institutionalized racism, we have to grapple with that and actually have real conversations about fundamentally how our system was based on racism and how that plays out in literally every section of our criminal justice system, from policing and arrests all the way through reentry. And then we also, and this alluded to I think the Tennessee question, we have to start having some hard conversations about nonviolent versus violent offenders, and I hate using that word, but what that really means. Because again, even if we take out everyone that has a drug conviction, we're still not really going to lessen and put a real dent into the number of people that are incarcerated. And it's not an easy conversation. It's often nuanced. Like everyone's charge often, again, is nuanced. It's not a cut and dry one size fits all. But we honestly have to have some real conversations about restorative justice and what those type of things can mean in our communities.
So we're wrapping up now. So please give my panel. And to close, I also can quickly address that question. That is, one of the false misnomers we have in society is once you do the crime, you do the time, and that's it. And that's just the beginning of a life sentence, because it is one of like the ultimate black eye that never goes away, and there are 47,000 collateral consequences that are associated with a criminal record. So keep that in mind.